Sam jerked awake to the deafening silence. Something was terribly wrong. Just yesterday, the steady, rhythmic hum of his farm's irrigation system was the pulse that kept his land alive. Now, as he swung his legs over the edge of his bed, the familiar sound was absent, replaced by an eerie, unsettling quiet. He bolted to the window and peered out into the pre-dawn gloom. In the distance, he could see the faint glow of emergency lights on his property and the unmistakable silhouette of someone fiddling with the power lines near his barn. It didn't take long for Sam to piece together the shocking truth. Karen had cut off his farm's power. Karen, known throughout Crescent Field for her strict adherence to HOA rules and her relentless meddling in neighbors' affairs, had once again overstepped her bounds. This time, however, her actions had gone far enough. With the power off, not only was his irrigation system silenced, but his entire operation was plunged into darkness. Sam's mind raced as he recalled the fine notice that had arrived the previous day. A staggering $50,000 penalty for unauthorized modifications and disruptions to community energy standards. As Sam stared at the empty control panel and the silent, lifeless machines, a surge of determination and indignation filled him. He wasn't about to let Karen's petty power play ruin everything he'd built. That fine wasn't just a financial setback. It was a direct challenge to his rights as a farmer and a proud, independent landowner. In that critical moment, Sam decided that if Karen was willing to disrupt his life so callously, then it was time to give her a wake-up call she wouldn't forget. He quickly donned his jacket and stepped outside, the cold morning air biting at his cheeks. With every step toward his barn, Sam's resolve hardened. He had spent years investing in modern, sustainable energy solutions for his farm, ensuring that his fields and livestock thrived even during the harshest winters. Now, seeing his lifeblood stolen and his operations jeopardized, he vowed that this injustice would not go unanswered. Today, Karen's interference would spark a retaliatory response that would shake the foundations of Crescent Fields. Crescent Fields was a sprawling, picturesque farming community known for its rolling pastures, neatly lined orchards, and an unspoken pride in self-sufficiency. Every homestead here was a testament to generations of hard work, with each farmer tending to their land with both modern innovation and traditional care. At the heart of this community stood Sam's family farm, a sprawling property where solar panels, state-of-the-art irrigation systems, and carefully maintained barns meshed with wide-open fields and rustic charm. But Crescent Fields was also home to a strict homeowners association that governed the community with an iron fist. The HOA's guidelines were designed to maintain order and uniformity, dictating everything from the color of barn roofs to the exact timing for seasonal displays. In this rigid system, deviations were rarely tolerated, and those who dared to express their individuality were met with fines and public admonishment. Among the most notorious enforcers of these rules was Karen Miller, or simply HOA Karen, to everyone in the area. In her mid-50s and always dressed in meticulously tailored attire, Karen had earned a reputation for her zealous approach to rule enforcement. With her clipboard in one hand and her smartphone in the other, she roamed Crescent Fields like a self-appointed guardian of perfection, ready to pounce on any perceived transgression, whether it was a stray cow or, as it turned out, a farm stand that didn't conform to the HOA's sterile standards. Sam, however, was a different breed of farmer. He believed that the true strength of Crescent Fields lay in its independence and the personal touch each family brought to their land. His farm was his legacy, a living, breathing work of art where creativity met innovation. He wasn't one to bow to arbitrary regulations that stifled his ability to run his operation as he saw fit. When the HOA fined him for his inventive energy modifications, Sam knew it was more than just a financial penalty. It was an affront to his right to live and work freely on his own land. While many neighbors quietly endured the HOA's strictures, a growing undercurrent of dissent had begun to swell. Residents spoke in hushed tones about the unfair fines and the oppressive overreach of Karen's methods. Sam's farm had always been a beacon of progressive farming in Crescent Fields, a place where tradition blended with modern technology. His investment in renewable energy systems wasn't merely about efficiency. It was a statement of independence, a refusal to be boxed in by outdated rules. When the power went out that fateful morning, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a declaration of war. Karen's brazen act of cutting off his power was intended to force compliance, to show him that even a small-town farmer was subject to her interpretation of community standards. But Sam was determined to fight back, to prove that creativity, innovation, and the right to self-determination were more important than Karen's narrow vision of order. As Sam surveyed his silent, darkened farm, he resolved that this would be his wake-up call, a turning point where he would reclaim his property and send a clear message to Karen and the entire HOA. It was time to restore not only his power, but also the spirit of independence that had defined Crescent Fields for generations. In the hours following the power outage, Sam moved swiftly to assess the damage. The entire farm was in disarray. The irrigation system lay silent, crops that needed watering began to wither, and essential equipment stood inert. Panic could have easily set in, but Sam's years of experience had taught him to remain calm under pressure. He immediately started reviewing the digital logs from his solar and irrigation systems, and there was no mistaking it. The power was deliberately cut off, and the timeline pointed directly to Karen Miller's notorious meddling. Fueled by anger and a deep sense of injustice, Sam documented every detail, taking screenshots of the system logs, collecting security footage that captured a shadowy figure near the control panel at the time of the outage, and even gathering testimonies from a few supportive neighbors who had noticed unusual activity on his property the night before. The evidence was damning, and Sam knew he needed to bring to light. Sam first attempted to resolve the issue through official channels. He filed a formal complaint with the HOA, presenting his evidence and demanding that the fine be rescinded and that Karen be held accountable. But the HOA board, known for its deference to Karen's long-standing reputation, dismissed his complaint as a misunderstanding and a technical glitch. Their tepid response only intensified Sam's resolve. He realized that if the board wouldn't act, he had to take matters into his own hands. That's when Sam began plotting his counter-retaliation. He recalled a conversation he'd had with a fellow farmer about taking decisive, creative action when the system failed you. Inspired by that discussion, Sam devised a plan that was as audacious as it was symbolic. He would hold the HOA accountable by imposing a massive fine on Karen, one that would serve as a wake-up call. He calculated that a fine of $50,000 would not only recoup the financial losses incurred from the power outage, but would also send a message that such overreach would come at a steep price. Over the next few days, Sam meticulously gathered all the documentation, drafted a formal notice of violation, using legal language and official letterhead that mimicked the HOA's own documents, and circulated it among supportive neighbors. His digital dossier, comprising logs, video clips, and testimonials, quickly went viral on community forums. Hashtags like #PowerJustice and #NoMoreKaren began trending locally as other residents chimed in with their own grievances about arbitrary fines and invasive enforcement. Meanwhile, whispers about Karen's actions spread throughout Crescent Fields. Some neighbors, long emboldened by Sam's refusal to be bullied, began to voice their own frustrations about the HOA's overbearing policies. Others, who had once been too intimidated to speak up, found in Sam a leader, a symbol of resistance against the tyranny of arbitrary rule. The digital petition he launched demanding a review of HOA practices gathered thousands of signatures, bolstering his case and forcing local media attention. But Karen was not one to back down easily. In a flurry of defensive emails and hastily recorded videos, she insisted that her actions were justified by the need to maintain order. "My job is to enforce the rules," she argued, her voice quivering with a mix of indignation and fear. If Sam can't comply, then consequences must follow. Her words, however, only fueled the community's ire, and every attempt to justify her actions was met with overwhelming digital evidence that pointed to deliberate sabotage. As the tension escalated, The situation reached a boiling point when Sam received an official notice from the HOA board, a warning that further actions on his part could result in additional fines or even legal action. But instead of yielding, Sam saw it as confirmation that his fight was not only justified but necessary. He realized that if the board was willing to side with Karen, then he would have to expose the system's failures publicly. It was time for a dramatic showdown that would force the entire community to re-examine the balance of power between individual rights and bureaucratic control. With every piece of evidence compiled, Sam prepared for the inevitable showdown. He organized a community meeting, gathered support from local activists, and ensured that every digital record was ready to be presented to the public. The stakes were high, not just for his farm, but for the principle that a homeowner's rights could never be undermined by an overzealous enforcer with unchecked authority. The conflict had transformed from a personal grievance into a movement that demanded accountability and respect for every resident's right to live and work freely on their property. In the days that followed, the uproar over the power outage and the subsequent $50,000 fine exploded across Crescent Fields. Social media was flooded with videos of Sam's detailed security footage and screenshots of the energy logs that clearly showed the deliberate power cut. Hashtags like #PowerJustice and #NoMoreKaren trended regionally, as residents shared their own stories of frustration with the HOA's arbitrary enforcement of rules. Local news stations picked up the story with fervor. Reporters arrived on the scene at Sam's farm, capturing the stark contrast between his once thriving, fully powered operation and the current state of disarray. "It's a classic David versus Goliath scenario," one anchor remarked, where a determined farmer stands up against an overreaching HOA enforcer. Interviews with neighbors revealed a deep-seated resentment toward the system that allowed someone like Karen to wield so much power, and Sam's bold challenge quickly became the symbol of a broader movement for property rights and community justice. Inside the HOA board, tension grew palpable. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors, and leaked minutes revealed a bitter rift among board members. Some staunchly defended Karen's actions, arguing that strict enforcement was necessary to maintain the pristine image of Crescent Fields. Others, however, expressed growing concern that Karen's behavior was not only unjust, but a dangerous abuse of power that could set a precedent for future violations. "We must protect the rights of our residents, or we risk losing the very essence of what makes this community unique," one board member was overheard saying. The internal conflict was a microcosm of the larger public outcry. Sam's digital dossier became a rallying point. He posted live updates on community forums and social media, sharing every detail, from the moment the power was cut to the mounting evidence that revealed Karen's deliberate intrusion. His posts were met with an outpouring of support from residents who had long been suppressed by the HOA's strict regulations. Digital petitions demanding a thorough review of HOA practices gathered thousands of signatures within hours, and local influencers began championing Sam's cause. "This is about more than power. It's about our right to live and work without being bullied by bureaucrats," one influential blogger wrote, and the sentiment spread like wildfire. Karen Miller, meanwhile, became increasingly defensive. In a series of hastily recorded videos and angry social media posts, she insisted that her actions were necessary to enforce community standards. "I'm just doing my job," she claimed, though her voice betrayed a hint of desperation. But every attempt to justify her actions was met with a flood of irrefutable digital evidence that showed a calculated, deliberate act of sabotage on a private farm. The public's reaction was swift and scathing. Comments like, "Karen, your time is up, and we won't stand for this abuse of power," dominated the digital landscape. As the controversy reached a fever pitch, the HOA board announced that a final public hearing would be held to address the incident and determine the future of enforcement policies in Crescent Fields. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. In the days leading up to the hearing, residents organized rallies and town hall meetings, their voices united in a demand for accountability. Every shared video clip, every hashtag, and every signature on the petition reinforced the message that the power to dictate community standards should not be concentrated in the hands of a single overzealous enforcer. On the morning of the public hearing, the community center was packed with residents, activists, and concerned citizens. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and the promise of change. Sam, armed with his comprehensive digital dossier, stepped forward to present his case. He recounted the sequence of events with clarity and passion, detailing how Karen's deliberate power cut had crippled his farm's operations and endangered his livelihood. His voice was calm but resolute as he laid out the evidence. A montage of security footage, energy logs, and witness testimonies that left no doubt about the deliberate nature of the theft. The tension in the room was palpable as residents listened, many nodding in agreement, their eyes reflecting years of pent-up frustration and hope for a more just system. The public hearing was not merely a forum to discuss fines and rules. It was a battle for the very soul of Crescent Fields, a fight for the right of every individual to live, work, and innovate freely without fear of arbitrary interference. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Crescent Fields Community Center. The room was filled with a diverse mix of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the fate of our community's enforcement policies. With unwavering resolve, Councilwoman Rebecca James stepped up to the podium, her eyes blazing with the hope and determination of a community that had long been stifled by arbitrary power. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed energy consumption logs, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman James began, her voice steady and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her deliberate act of cutting off the power to a private farm, were not motivated by any legitimate concern for community order, but were driven by personal bias and a blatant abuse of power. Our community's rights, as individual property owners, must be upheld, and we cannot allow a single enforcer's personal vendettas to dictate our lives. A heavy silence settled over the room as James continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to this incident, and we will launch a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such overreach. Furthermore, new guidelines will be established to protect the rights of every resident to operate their property without fear of arbitrary interference. Today's decision is not merely about reversing a fine. It is a resounding declaration that Crescent Fields will stand for fairness, accountability, and the right to live and work freely. Her words resonated deeply, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a respected community advocate rose to speak, a man whose unwavering commitment to individual rights had inspired countless residents. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should ever have their livelihood compromised by the personal whims of an overzealous enforcer. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values innovation, independence, and the sanctity of private property above all. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His words were met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a call for change. Following his powerful address, a senior officer from the local utility oversight department presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert analyses, and official reports that confirmed the deliberate nature of the power cut and verified the financial losses incurred. The evidence was irrefutable. The unauthorized shutdown had caused significant damage to the farm's operations, and every attempt by Karen Miller to justify her actions was exposed as a sham. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman James concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Fields, a community where every resident's rights are respected and where public authority is exercised with integrity and fairness. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, regardless of their self-appointed status, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live and work freely. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and creative freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Fields. The days of arbitrary enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Crescent Fields underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly throughout local media and on social networks, sparking impassioned debates about property rights, community governance, and the freedom to innovate without fear. Editorials in the local newspaper, bearing headlines such as "A New Dawn for Crescent Fields" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to safeguard every resident's right to operate their property and express themselves freely. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreBullying, and #InnovateFreely trended widely, reinforcing the community's determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and envision a future where local creativity was not only tolerated but celebrated. Neighbors who had long endured the oppressive oversight of the HOA now spoke proudly about their right to manage their own property in a manner that reflected their individuality. Our land is our legacy, and we must protect it at all costs, one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his words echoing throughout the packed room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Crescent Fields would forever honor the creative spirit of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and a responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized fairly and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or invasive enforcement. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed at a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to further empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and the importance of creative freedom. When we stand together, our voices have the power to reshape our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite and demand a more inclusive and fair governance model. For Sam, and for every resident who had long been silenced by arbitrary HOA overreach, the journey from confrontation to resolution was deeply transformative. My decision to fight back against Karen Miller's blatant abuse of power by standing up for my right to operate a farm stand, by rallying the community, and by forcing the HOA to reconsider its oppressive policies, had not only restored my freedom, but had also ignited a movement for change. The digital evidence that exposed the injustice became a beacon of hope, a rallying cry for every property owner in Crescent Fields who believed in the sanctity of individual rights and creative expression. Karen Miller, once the unchallenged enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community unites for justice. Her influence rapidly dwindled as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the necessity of reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Fields, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the soft glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights," was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory over arbitrary interference, a victory for every homeowner and every creative soul in our community, Councilwoman Carter proclaimed, her voice resolute and inspiring. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our freedoms and to ensure that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Crescent Fields, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen Miller's attempt to ban my farm stand was met with an ingenious counterattack, and how I reclaimed my property rights by buying the grocery store she so revered, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in individual freedom and creative expression. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Crescent Fields, truth, justice, and the right to innovate would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Crescent Fields would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual property were cherished above all else.